In the central archives of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, in collection 241, inventory 2593, file 26, an operational summary from the headquarters of the 3rd Belarusian Front dated February 18, 1945, dispatched to the General Staff at 1640, is stored. This document, printed on standard sheets of yellowish paper, dryly records in military language an event that changed the course of the East Prussian Strategic Offensive. The text states that at 1345 in the area on the outskirts of the city of Melzak, the commander of the front forces, Army General Ivan Danilovich Chernyakhovsky, was severely wounded. Subsequent lines of the report contain information about the nature of the wound and state the fact that the commander's life ended en route to the location of the 61st Separate Medical Sanitary Battalion. This document became the starting point for the emergence of dozens of alternative historical versions linking the death of the youngest front commander with deliberate elimination by the country's top leadership, or the envy of higher-ranking marshals. Before we proceed to a detailed analysis of this archival file, logistical maps and ballistic examinations, I ask you to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue working with primary sources, finding unique documents, and reconstructing the hidden pages of military history with maximum accuracy. For an objective analysis of the causes and conditions of the incident, it is necessary to reconstruct the overall military, technical, and economic situation in the theater of operations as of mid-February 1945. The East Prussian operation, which began on January 13, 1945, was developing against the backdrop of the enemy's echeloned defense. The German Fourth Army, under the command of General of the Infantry Friedrich Wilhelm Müller, relied on powerful defensive lines, including the Heilsberg fortified region. This area contained 911 reinforced concrete firing points, connected by an extensive network of trenches and anti-tank ditches. The density of permanent fortifications ranged from 4 to 6 pillboxes per linear kilometer of the front. The advancing units of the 3rd Belarusian Front, with a total strength of about 700,000 men, were sustaining significant losses in materiel. By February 15, 1945, the strength of the tank brigades of the 5th Guards Tank Army under Colonel General Vasily Volsky had fallen to 35% of their authorized strength. The initial ammunition supply, amounting to 2 full basic loads per gun before the start of the operation, had by mid-February decreased to 0.4 basic loads due to logistical difficulties. The main problem was the difference in railway gauges. Soviet railway troops had only managed to convert the main line to Insterburg to the domestic standard of 1,524 millimeters. Further supply of the troops was carried out by motor transport along destroyed highways, which reduced the capacity of the supply lines to 60% of the front's estimated requirements. Weather conditions during this period also complicated combat operations. According to meteorological reports from the headquarters of the 1st Air Army, from February 10th to 18th, 1945, constant fog, wet snow, and thaw were observed in the southern part of East Prussia. The air temperature fluctuated from -2 to +3 degrees Celsius. Dirt roads became completely impassable for wheeled vehicles. Movement was possible only on asphalt or cobblestone roads, which were systematically subjected to artillery fire from the retreating German units. The German command used the tactic of harassment fire with single roving guns of 105 and 150 mm caliber located in concealed positions 6 to 10 kilometers from the front line. These guns fired not at specific targets, but at key intersections and road junctions using pre-registered coordinates, with the aim of disorganizing Soviet logistics. The Chronicle of events on February 18, 1945, is reconstructed from the combat logs of the front headquarters, the 3rd Army, and the 41st Rifle Corps. At 800 hours, General Chernyakhovsky concluded a morning meeting at the front headquarters, which was located in the city of Insterburg, now Chernyakovsk. At 9:30 hours, the commander decided to personally travel to the location of the headquarters of the 3rd Guards Tank Corps, which was engaged in combat in the area of the city of Melzak, now the Polish Pieniężno. The purpose of the trip was to inspect the readiness of the units to deliver a flank attack to accelerate the liquidation of the Heilsberg grouping. The motorcade consisted of only 2 vehicles. In the first vehicle, an open Willys passenger car, were Chernyakhovsky himself, his aide-de-camp Major Komarov, and the driver Sergeant Nikolai Volkov. In the second vehicle followed a security detail of 4 soldiers in a similar car. The route passed through the populated areas of Bartenstein and Landsberg. The distance from Insterburg to Melzak via the road network was about 120 kilometers. The speed of the column, due to traffic jams and destroyed road sections, did not exceed 40 kilometers per hour. At approximately 1340 hours, the commander's car approached the northeastern outskirts of the city of Melzak. This settlement had been taken by units of the 41st Rifle Corps of the 3rd Army under the command of Colonel General Alexander Gorbatov, 24 hours prior to the described events. The city was considered a deep rear area, as the forward positions of the Soviet troops had advanced westward by a distance of 8 to 12 kilometers. At the moment when Chernyakovsky's Willys was approximately 400 meters from the city limits, a single artillery shell explosion was heard behind the car. A fragment from this shell pierced the rear wall of the car's body, passed through the back of the seat, and inflicted a through-and-through wound on the general in the left side of his chest, in the area of the shoulder blade, exiting in the area of the sternum. No other person in the car, including the driver and the aide-de-camp, was injured. The security detail immediately transferred the wounded commander to the second vehicle and turned it towards the nearest hospital. However, the injury proved fatal due to extensive damage to major blood vessels and internal bleeding. At 14:15 hours, doctors from the Medical Sanitary Battalion pronounced the death of the military leader. Upon detailed study of the documents, the first serious discrepancy in the archival sources is revealed, concerning the exact time of the incident. The operational report from the front headquarters indicates the time as 13:45 hours. However, the report by the head of the front's medical service, Major General of the Medical Service Dmitry Vorontsov, records that the wounded Chernyakhovsky was delivered to the 61st Separate Medical Sanitary Battalion at 14:05 hours, already in a state of clinical death. The physical distance from the explosion site on the outskirts of Melzak to the location of the Medical Sanitary Battalion in a rear area village was 19 kilometers along damaged roads. Even at the maximum possible speed for an ambulance vehicle under muddy conditions, covering this distance would have taken no less than 35 minutes. This means that either the explosion occurred significantly earlier than the time indicated by the headquarters, at approximately 13:20 hours, or the recording of the time in the documents was done retroactively, based on approximate oral reports from shocked witnesses. Such a time discrepancy of 25 minutes is critical for wartime operational documents and indicates initial confusion within the staff structures. The second error in planning and organizing movements in the near-front zone is associated with the actions of the front's Commandant Service and the SMERSH counterintelligence, headed in this sector by Lieutenant General Pavel Zelenin. According to the 1943 Red Army Headquarters Service Manual, the routes of movement for senior command personnel were to be preliminarily checked by the Traffic Control Service and Engineering Reconnaissance. The stretch of road on the approaches to Melzak was within direct line of sight from the heights held by German units in the area of elevation 142.7. German artillery observers had the technical capability to track any vehicle movement along this highway using stereoscopic telescopes with a 10 times magnification. Dispatching the front commander in an unprotected, unarmored car along a section of road that was under enemy observation and within the range of his firepower was a direct violation of safety requirements by the security officers and the Front Chief of Staff, Colonel General Alexander Pokrovsky. Under the conditions of combat operations in East Prussia, where the enemy actively employed fire ambush tactics, using an open Willys vehicle for trips to the front line without armored escort was an unjustifiable risk. The third serious discrepancy concerns ballistic analysis and the absence of records of counter-battery warfare in this sector. In the artillery order logs of the Third Army for February 18, 1945, from 1200 to 1500 hours, there is not a single entry about opening return fire on the positions of German batteries in the Melzak area. According to the rules of Soviet artillery doctrine, any enemy shelling within an army's area of responsibility was to be immediately suppressed by fire from the reserve of the High Command artillery. The lack of recording of the German shelling by artillery instrumental reconnaissance divisions gave rise to the version that the shell could have been fired by a Soviet battery. On that day, the artillery of the 41st Rifle Corps was changing firing positions and firing on retreating enemy columns at maximum distances. Errors in calculating coordinates when compiling firing tables under conditions of rapid position changes and poor visibility led to instances of firing on one's own troops. The direction of the shell's arrival, recorded by the surviving adjutant Komarov, indicates that the explosion occurred strictly behind the car, which was moving southwest. This means the shell came from the northeast, that is, from the side where Soviet rear units were located, and not from the German positions, which were to the west and northwest. This topographical fact was not officially investigated, and the materials of the ballistic examination of the shell fragment extracted from the general's body were classified. Let us consider the logical grounds for the conspiracy theory about the intentional elimination of Chernyakhovsky on the orders of Stalin or due to intrigues of the old generals. Proponents of this version point out that by February 1945, Ivan Danilovich Chernyakhovsky was the youngest army general in the armed forces of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. He was 38 years old. Under his command, the troops of the Third Belorussian Front successfully carried out the Belarusian Operation, forced the Neman River, and were the first to enter German territory. There are unsubstantiated claims that the People's Commissar of Defense signed a decree awarding Chernyakhovsky the rank of Marshal of the Soviet Union, and the announcement of this decision was planned for February 23, 1945, Army Day. The growing popularity of the young general among soldiers and officers, his independence of judgment, and direct access to Stalin could have caused concern for Marshals Georgy Zhukov and Ivan Konev, who were competing for the right to conduct the Berlin strategic operation. However, a cold analysis of the military-political situation refutes this hypothesis. In February 1945, the Soviet leadership was focused on maximizing the speed of the offensive on the Berlin axis. Removing a successful front commander in the midst of the complex East Prussian operation would have led to the immediate disorganization of the command and control system for 5 armies. Stalin, as the supreme commander-in-chief, pragmatically assessed his personnel and understood that replacing a commander of such caliber would require the redeployment of strategic reserves and cause a delay in the offensive of at least 10 to 15 days. This jeopardized the entire Stavka plan for the synchronized advance of the 1st Belarusian, 2nd Belarusian, and 3rd Belarusian fronts to the Oder River. Political motives for eliminating Chernyakhovsky at this stage of the war were completely absent, as he posed no threat to state power and was solely an executive and effective instrument in the hands of the Stavka. The technical side of the assassination version, involving an artillery barrage, also does not stand up to scrutiny from the perspective of probability theory and ballistics. It is impossible to deliver a precision strike with a single artillery shell on a moving vehicle from a distance of over 8 kilometers. The circular error probable for 150 mm caliber guns at such a range is no less than 60 meters in distance and 25 meters in lateral deviation. Organizing a conspiracy in which the perpetrator would have to calculate the shell's trajectory with an accuracy of 1 meter at the moment a specific car was passing is technically unfeasible, even with modern high-precision technology, which was non-existent in 1945. The single fragment that struck the general was the result of the mathematical distribution of lethal elements from a random explosion. The shell exploded on the ground, throwing up a fountain of shrapnel. Most of the fragments traveled upward and sideways on a radial trajectory, and only one fragment, weighing about 30 grams, flew on a flat trajectory, parallel to the ground, at human height, piercing the thin sheet iron body of the Willys. This is a classic example of a combat accident, documented hundreds of times in the war for commanders of various ranks. A critical audit of the front command's decisions shows that the tragedy was a consequence of the accumulated fatigue of the leadership and a general decline in vigilance during the final stage of the war. By the beginning of 1945, many military commanders had developed a sense of superiority over the enemy, which led to the neglect of elementary rules of camouflage and covert movement. General Chernyakhovsky regularly traveled to the front lines without proper operational escort. During an inspection of the 5th Army in January 1945, his car also came under mortar fire, but on that occasion, the consequences were limited to a damaged wheel. This incident was not analyzed by the front headquarters, and no organizational conclusions were drawn to enhance the commander's security. The command continued to use standard travel routes along open highways instead of organizing protected field communication paths. The death of General Chernyakhovsky had operational and tactical significance for the entire course of the East Prussian operation. A temporary power vacuum arose in the command system of the 3rd Belorussian Front, lasting about 36 hours. To rectify the situation, the Supreme High Command Headquarters made an emergency decision. By Directive Number 11026 of February 20, 1945, Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky was appointed commander of the front forces. For this purpose, he was relieved of his duties as Chief of the General Staff. Upon arriving in Insterburg, Vasilevsky conducted a complete review of the available forces and means. He concluded that the plan for the liquidation of the enemy, drawn up by the previous command, did not account for the actual state of the front's logistical base. The offensive was temporarily halted for 4 days to bring up the rear, convert railway tracks, and accumulate ammunition to a standard of 1.5 basic loads. The influence of the change in command on the logistical base of the sides manifested itself in a change in the tactics of the Soviet troops. Instead of a simultaneous offensive across the entire front, Marshal Vasilevsky concentrated the main forces of the breakthrough artillery on a narrow sector in the Kreuzberg area. An artillery fire density of up to 220 guns and mortars per 1 kilometer of front was achieved. This made it possible to split the German Heiligenbeil grouping into 3 isolated sectors and destroy it by the end of March 1945. However, the delay caused by Chernyakhovsky's death and the subsequent regrouping of troops shifted the overall timeline for the capture of Königsberg by almost 3 weeks from the original schedule. The casualty statistics for the Third Belorussian Front for the period of the operation from January 13th to April 25th, 1945, amounted to more than 166,000 people, of which irrecoverable losses exceeded 41,000 soldiers and officers. The wounding and subsequent death of General Chernyakhovsky became the single largest loss among the senior command of the Red Army at this stage of the war. The loss of a military leader of such caliber deprived the army of a prospective commander, whose methods of troop control were based on high mobility and deep technical analysis of the actions of tank and mechanized formations. In the final dry analysis, historical research of archival documents shows that the death of Ivan Danilovich Chernyakhovsky has no proven conspiratorial basis. All conspiracy theories are built on indirect evidence, such as discrepancies in the timing of reports and the absence of counter-battery fire, which, in the chaos of real war, is a common consequence of failures in the work of headquarters and rear structures. The general's death on the outskirts of Melzak was the result of a tragic coincidence of several factors: negligence in safety measures when planning the commander's travel route, the lack of armored transport, the enemies conducting indiscriminate barrage artillery fire, and the random trajectory of one specific shell fragment. This case underscores that in war, the risk zone is the same for a private soldier in a frontline trench and for a front commander located several kilometers behind it. The true history of General Chernyakhovsky's death is recorded not in the conjectures of memoirists, but in the dry numbers of ballistic coordinates, meteorological reports, and staff orders, which forever remain in archival folders under a secrecy classification, lifted only decades after the end of hostilities.